Hey everyone, Dr. Mike here again, and today we are talking about Chapter 3, which is our Motion and Stability chapter. So granted, this deals with a lot of physics stuff, but I just want you really to understand the underlying principles of it, not necessarily the math behind it or how to calculate any of these things. So let's get right into it. When we look at our developmental changes, we want to know that these changes are predictable. So what you're doing as you're developing is you're gaining more of an ability to stabilize your motion stability continuum. And we'll see what we mean by that in the next slide here. Now, as you start changing, you're going to be able to produce more force and velocity while increasing your accuracy. And this next set of videos really describes that or explains that. If we look at video A here, this is my son Mason, who is about 17 months old. I think at the time here he was only about 13, 14 months. But you can see when he starts jumping, he's jumping and he's getting very little air time from each jump. And he's falling virtually every time he does jump. So this means that he has poor mobility, poor force production, and poor stability. And it's expected for being a toddler, that is something you expect. Now, if we go over to the second video here of an older child, so this is a child in his late single digits, I believe he's 8 or 9 here. But if you look with his jumping, he's bounding into rings and not losing any balance or having no balance or stability issues. This is the kind of development you want to see as you age. So as you age, you're able to produce more force. You see he's jumping considerably farther than Mason. He is producing a lot more movement, and he's able to control himself or have more stability, or his accuracy is improving. Now, as we get into Newton's first law, this is just our objects in motion stay in motion, objects at rest stay in rest. As we look at this first law of motion, all we want to really remember here are the two terms inertia and momentum. Inertia is our resistance to motion, and that's related to our mass. So you're going to have more resistance to motion the heavier you are. You're also going to have more resistance to stopping the heavier you are if you're already in movement. So if you gain momentum, meaning momentum, which is labeled as P here, equals our mass times our velocity. If you have something that's really heavy that's moving, let's say it's like a cannonball, that does not want to stop. So the momentum is high, meaning that its inertia or its resistance to stopping its motion is also going to be high. Let's look at this in a practical sense. Let's look at Mason here again. Now, the slide will tell you you should be looking at a child swinging a bat. This is about as close as you're going to get here for having a child do this naturally. But what he's doing is he's picking up this box here, and you see that he lifts it and he swings it out in front of himself. Kind of similar to what you would do with a bat. What you'll notice here is that it takes a lot of effort for him to lift that box up. But then as soon as he starts moving it, then he has a lot more difficult of a time stopping it because it's already in motion. As he picks this box up, you notice he's holding it from the very end. That means that this box is very, very top heavy to him. So the amount of inertia the box has is going to be higher because the force being exerted on it is not in an ideal position. As you age and as you develop more strength and the ability to exert more force, you'll see that you have more control over this so that you're able to actually manipulate this box or a bat in the plane of motion or in the direction you want to take it. Now, if we want to move something farther or faster, you need to either increase the force on the object or you need to increase the distance over which the force is applied. So what does that actually mean? Well, we look here at how we're kicking. And we'll look at Mason again here kicking. And if you notice, as he kicks, he just kind of runs up to it and hits the ball with his leg. Doesn't really matter where it goes, but he's just hitting it. Now, if we look at about a 2-year-old doing this, you'll notice that they start kicking it much more methodically, and it's going straight forward. As he's kicking it, he's able to control his kick a lot better. He's beginning to get more accuracy and more force directed right on the ball where he's intending for it to go. If we look farther into the future still, you'll see at about 5 years old, now you're gaining the ability to actually go ahead and get your leg into more extension. So if we look at this here, you see how the girl gets extension on her leg. You can see how she is extending her back leg or kicking leg so that she gains more distance away from the ball so she can develop or bring about more momentum and more force onto the ball. This here is going to cause her to have a greater force and a longer kick. Now, with the second law, this just states that our object's force is related to mass and acceleration. So you may be familiar with the equation force equals mass times acceleration. And what this really just says is the rate of change of momentum to a body is directly proportional to the force applied, and then the change in momentum takes place in the direction of the applied force. What does that mean? Well, you're going to have momentum in a direction. If I'm moving forward, my momentum is carrying me forward. Now, if I have something that causes a force on me, if, say, I bump into somebody, well, if somebody hits me on the side and pushes me to the side, my momentum is then going to shift from going forward to going to the side away from where that force was directed. So if someone hits me on this side going this way, my body is going to carry that way in the horizontal direction. Even though I'm moving forward, the force that acts on me goes horizontal, so my body moves horizontal. How this relates to us and with development, with sports, is that when you are doing some sort of fast-moving, high-force-producing activity, let's say you're throwing a ball, force is only going to be able to increase if acceleration increases. This is because for Newton's second law to actually work, or to be applicable, your mass has to be constant. So, with most things we look at here on Earth, say like throwing a ball, the ball maintains constant mass. If you were in space, let's say you were talking about, say, a comet, where the comet's tail is debris coming from the comet itself, it's losing mass, meaning that Newton's second law would not be applicable to a comet. So that's why I say, for this to work, you have to have a constant mass. Therefore, the only way you can increase force is to increase acceleration. How do we increase acceleration? Well, you increase acceleration by increasing velocity. How do you increase velocity? You increase displacement over time. So velocity is displacement over time. I'll use the term distance and displacement synonymously, even though they're really not the same thing. But just to make this easier to understand, when you are moving, you're moving a given distance. If I throw a ball, and I throw a ball from here to here, my distance is relatively short. It's only about, say, this far, maybe a couple feet. Now, if I increase the distance of my arm by bringing my arm back, starting back here, and then throwing, I've now increased the distance from here all the way to here. So now I've almost doubled my distance, and the amount of time it takes me to do that, because my effort should be roughly the same, is very minimal. Therefore, I'm increasing velocity with only a very, very small increase in time. So because velocity increases and time maintains relatively low, my acceleration increases. my acceleration increases, my force increases. So the more distance I have, typically the better off I'm going to be. Now, the other part here about the whole force applied to your momentum, this goes now to the direction I go. It's one thing to have this distance here, but I need to have that distance in the correct direction. I need to be going in the correct plane. For all intents and purposes, when I throw a baseball, I'm throwing it in the sagittal plane, so I'm throwing it straight forward. If I have any acceleration or momentum going in any other direction, let's say I'm in the frontal plane, which would be side to side, or the transverse plane, which is top to bottom or rotational, I am going to lose velocity because my displacement is going to be higher, but I am going to be changing my overall momentum from going forward to going in a different direction. If my momentum deviates, my velocity is going to decrease. So, Newton's second law here, I am going to increase my velocity, or I'm going to increase my force if I increase distance of the movement. So that can be throwing a ball, kicking a ball with my legs swinging backward. But the caveat is I have to have all of my force going in the same direction as my intended target. Alright, now as we get into Newton's third law of motion, this is one that everyone is able to quote pretty easily. This is equal and opposite forces. So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Whenever you exert a force on an object, that object exerts a force of equal magnitude back on you. This is also why you don't want to have super strength as your superpower. Because let's say you're the Hulk trying to break open or bust open, say, the ground. Every time you hit the ground with that hulking force, the ground is shooting that energy right back up at you. So more importantly, you probably want to have, like, say, a super healing factor or some way to negate Newton's third law of motion. What's happening here in terms of us and athletics is that you want to be using force in the plane of motion in which you want to move yourself or an object. And you want to avoid rotational movements that reduce force in that plane. So remember, with the second law, how momentum will shift the direction that you're going based on the direction that the momentum is meeting you, or that force of the momentum is meeting you. This here is the same kind of thing. If you are able to, say, throw a ball straight in one plane of motion, it's going to make it so it goes faster. If you have any rotational movements, either throwing, kicking, running, you're going to lose on your overall efficiency. Say you're running, and you start running, and you start flailing your arms at the sides. Now, you're changing the plane of motion that you want to go. You want to be going forward in the sagittal plane. If I'm moving my arms out in the frontal plane, that's taking away from being able to move in the sagittal plane. So I'm going to have less efficiency of movement, worse overall movement. Now, how does that actually apply then here with our greater athletic picture? Well, this all has to do with force and time. If we want to make an object move, you need to increase the force. So the force needs to increase and the time needs to decrease. So if we're punching, karate chopping, something like that, you want your force to be as high as it can. You want your time to be as low as it can. The higher the force and the shortest amount of time means the greatest impact you're going to have. Now, if you want to make something stop, you want to increase the time. To make something stop, you want the time to be really long. You want the force to be really small. If you're trying to land in gymnastics, let's say you're landing your dismount, you don't want to land and then fall forward. You want to land and stop. So if you notice, every time someone lands in gymnastics, they land and they bend their knees. They're bending their knees so that they absorb more more of that force, kind of more of that shock wave going down over a longer distance and longer duration of time. If you landed with your legs straight, you would be landing at a very short time and a very high force. It'd be very hard to stay upright doing that. That's why you want to bend the knees to absorb some of that blow so that you can increase the time spent transferring that energy away from your body and maintaining more stability there. Now, when you increase your rotational velocity, you're going to increase the amount of force or speed that you have. This is going to work for doing things like gymnastics. It's also going to be applicable for things that are going to involve throwing or kicking. Because if you increase that rotational velocity, and again, this is in the direction that you are intending to go, it's going to move you faster. That's going to in turn make it so that you have a greater force production. If you increase the moment arm, you're going to slow yourself down. This is why you don't throw a ball with your arm fully extended. Now, granted, if you're a bowler in cricket, yes, your arm is fully extended and going forward. But if you're, say, throwing a baseball or doing any other like overhead throwing motion, you want your arm bent so that when the distance increases, it still maintains to roughly your center of your body. It maintains a shorter overall distance. Because if I go straight arm, I lose velocity because now it takes too much time relative to the force I can generate to be able to give me a high velocity. If I'm here and I use my rotating muscles, so my external rotators to my internal rotators, these are going to move extremely fast. So I'm going to increase that rotational velocity. Now, if you see here in this backflip that I'm going to show you, you'll notice that when the guy's legs are extended, that he slows down. But as soon as he tucks his legs in, he speeds up. And all this is really showing you is this whole equal and opposite forces. When I go and I tuck my legs in, speed up. So that is how you get the whole equal and opposite forces. If you are extending your legs, you are extending the force away from your center of gravity, and so you are slowing your momentum down because you're increasing your moment arm, or you're lengthening your moment arm. You pull your knees or legs in close to you, you're putting that force, that rotational force, back in towards you, speeds up the flip. Developmental skills that we have to use to learn to absorb force. Whenever Mason is jumping, he's not able to absorb the force of landing. That's why he's falling or he's stumbling. He can't adequately absorb the force to maintain his balance. What you see here as he jumps, his arms come out to the side. Well, he's learning or starting to learn what happens with having a counterbalance there. So having a counterbalance is going to help with early stage development of stability. What you're going to learn to do in the greater perspective of things is you're going to learn to properly allow a transition of forces going through your body or through your kinetic chain while doing some sort of task to maintain your stability while still performing a functional task. This is how, again, gymnasts are able to stick landings without falling over. It's also how you're able to, say, swing a bat without spinning around or falling flat on your face, throwing a ball without falling forward, kicking without slipping and going backward. You're learning counterbalances. So you're able to better operate your kinetic chain than you are before you develop those skills. We have this stability and balance continuum. So stability is just resistance and movement. Balance is just able to maintain equilibrium, typically while moving. Now, how do we do this? Well, if you want to increase stability, you're going to increase your base of support. Get wider base of support, lower center of gravity. If something is very tall and very skinny and top heavy, it's going to fall over. If something is very short and very bottom heavy, it is going to be nearly impossible to topple over. So the more stable you are from a development and athletic sense is when you have your legs spread a little bit wider, so about shoulder width apart, your knees are bent, and this way you are lowering your center of gravity and you are increasing your base of support. Now, to increase your balance, you want to increase your stability. But more importantly, when it comes to a functional sense, you want to improve your strength, coordination, and proprioception. This all is going to help you to better manage how your body perceives itself in space. If we look here, Mason is starting to learn this a little bit with his walking. So when he walks, he gets lower, lowering that center of gravity. So he is able to increase his stability by lowering that center of gravity, getting better support. There's a trade-off here. When you start to learn to become more stable, you are going to try to maximize stability and balance, but you are going to lower your ability to move quickly. You will be walking slower, but you'll be walking upright. This is why when you first start to ambulate, you don't stand up and run, because you can't move fast and maintain stability. You stand up, you take very, very slow, short steps, because that's all the faster you can move to maintain your stability with balance. As you develop, now you're going to be able to maintain that upright posture, start running, start using agility, and overall moving faster and moving in different directions. Finally here, how do we detect and correct errors? Well, there's a five-step process to doing this. You want to observe the complex skill, analyze each phase and its elements, use your knowledge of mechanics, select errors to be corrected, and decide on appropriate methods for correcting of errors. What does that actually mean? Well, we're observing our complex skill. So in the case of, like, say, child development, let's say their complex skill is walking. You are going to then analyze each phase of the gait cycle there. Knowing the mechanics of the gait cycle, you can see if a child is, say, swaying too far side to side, or if they're kicking their legs out and around instead of going forward, if their legs are straight instead of bending, if their ankles have enough dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. All those you're going to be looking at. You're going to pick out the errors and then decide the method to correct it. Now, I don't expect you all to know how to correct all these errors initially, but what you should be able to do is you should be able to look at someone's mechanics in virtually anything and be able to pick out if something's wrong. Now, in, say, a very high-speed movement, let's say like a baseball pitcher, a golf swing, a bat swing, something where it's moving very fast, you typically need to have some sort of feedback via like a slow motion camera to truly get a complete understanding of the mechanics involved. The naked eye can only do so much when you look at these very fast speeds. But rule of thumb, if it looks wrong, it probably is wrong. Things shouldn't look awkward when you're talking about movement mechanics. If it looks awkward, chances are it's not correct. Alright, so that is your overview of Chapter 3. And if you have any questions, as always, you can send me a text or you can shoot me an email, and I will see you all later.